In the last in the last video, I said that I would come back to mechanism 6 and 7 because these have to do with postsynaptic receptors, and there's just more I need to teach you about these receptors before that would make sense. Now, these receptors are actually a little more complicated than I've led on. They actually have, I'm just going to use this as something to draw on. They have multiple sites where different chemicals can bind. So it's not quite as simple as I've led on. Okay, that's first. Next, drugs can be taken that can either go and activate the receptor, causing the ion channel to open. So, see, this is the home of the neurotransmitter, but the drug goes there as an imposter, chemically similar enough to the neurotransmitter to activate that site. Or, in this case, I gave you a drug that goes and blocks the receptor, causing it to stay closed for as long as the drug is active. Now, drugs can have either direct effects or indirect effects. Now, let's look here. Remember I said there are multiple sites of drug action on a receptor? Well, the site where the neurotransmitter goes, that's the key site. Let's call that the principal site. But there are these other sites. If the drug goes, as in this case, and binds to where the neurotransmitter wants to bind, then we call that a direct or competitive action. Competitive is easier for me to remember because the idea is that the drug is competing with the neurotransmitter for that same site, and only one of them can be in there. Indirect is what's illustrated here, where the drug goes and binds to an alternate site. Non-competitive because the drug is no longer, in this case, competing with the neurotransmitter. They each have their own separate sites. So drugs can be given that either activate a receptor, block a receptor. They can act competitively or directly by going to the principal site, or they can act indirectly or non competitively by going to one of these alternate sites. Here, here, here. In addition, drugs can have partial or full effects. And that's what it sounds like. Partial actions are weaker than full actions. One place where this is very relevant is in opioid treatment, addiction treatment, where people are often given a partial agonist. So, this is a drug that goes to the postsynaptic receptor, doing competitive binding with the mu receptor, but only partially activating it. that's enough to give people relief of their withdrawal symptoms, and that's enough to give people relief of their cravings, but not enough for them to get intoxicated. And a lot of patients need this kind of opioid maintenance or replacement therapy. The last concept about receptors I wanted to cover before we go back to the mechanisms of drug action is affinity. Affinity is the strength with which a chemical wants to bind with a particular site. The strength with which a particular drug or neurotransmitter, particular chemical, binds or wants to bind with that site. This is, again, reflecting back on our opioid epidemic topic. We have a rescue medication for opioid overdoses, right? Narcan. When you are given that Narcan or naloxone, actually, I shouldn't draw it. I should draw it here. When you're given the Narcan or naloxone, that drug molecule has super strong affinity for the very same receptor where your heroin molecule is, or even worse, fentanyl. This is heroin or fentanyl. You're dying, you're overdosing, you're not breathing because you're so inhibited. We gave you Narcan, and this molecule again has super strong affinity for this site. So what happens is it comes in here, kicks this fentanyl molecule out, and sits in its spot. But the naloxone molecule doesn't activate, it actually shuts it down. So it's a lifesaver because it has such high affinity for the same receptor that the opiates stimulate. Now, one consequence of this is immediately the patient goes into withdrawal because all of the opiate receptors that were stimulated are now completely blocked, and they will experience the worst withdrawal immediately that they've ever felt. Now, going back to mechanism 6 and 7, we see simply, now it'll make a lot of sense, that mechanism 6, we give you a drug that goes to that postsynaptic receptor and stimulates it. And in mechanism 7, the drug goes to the postsynaptic receptor and blocks it, just sits on it. The way I think of these blockers is, let's say you're coming home late one night and you're tired and you put the wrong key in your lock and you're turning it, and then you break your key off. Now you have the wrong key in there, which is not going to open your door, and you can't even put the right key in there. Okay, so the receptor is blocked. Mechanisms 6 and 7 are very powerful mechanisms because they do not interact with or require neurotransmitters. They take the place of the neurotransmitter. You don't even need all this presynaptic machinery for these to take effect. Very powerful effects, both blocking or stimulating at the receptor level. And those are the main mechanisms of drug action. Next, we're going to start getting into the neurotransmitters.